Hello and welcome to ID Talk, answers from an infectious disease expert. I'm Dr. Sean Elliott, a pediatric infectious disease specialist with Tucson Medical Center, professor emeritus of pediatrics at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, and chapter immunization representative at the Arizona chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. This podcast has been created to answer questions from our chapter's members about the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, as I record this is June 8th, 2021. In the world, there have been almost 174 million cases with 3.74 million deaths. In the United States, our numbers are slowing down, and we are at 33,386,000 plus cases, almost 599,000 deaths. The closest country by comparison, India, where the cases and the surge unfortunately remain quite active with much devastation. India has a total of almost 29 million cases and over 350,000 deaths. So the numbers in at least this part of the world have slowed down, thank heavens. Certainly in Arizona, the numbers have slowed down. But there are certainly hotspots around the world, including India, parts of Asia and Eurasia, where the numbers continue to be quite significant. Looking specifically to children, and again, this is the AAP weekly report. This data is from June 3rd. Kids total in the United States are almost 4 million cases total, which is 14.1% of the total number of cases. That comes out to 5,307 pediatric cases per 100,000 children. Interestingly, in terms of the number of new cases, children have accounted for 17% of the new cases in the last week. That number has been as high as 24%. So I would interpret that as we're doing a better job of immunizing our most at-risk older adult patients, leaving, of course, the at-risk younger patients to develop the new cases. Now, this says nothing about the severity of the cases. Thankfully, children continue to be milder in onset and milder in their complications, but that's not zero. And certainly, many of us, I would imagine, are encountering pediatric patients with long COVID or long haul symptoms, which come from even the mildest or most asymptomatic cases. So these numbers are still quite significant. In Arizona specifically, our total number of pediatric cases, birth through age 17, are 144,654. That's total cases. That comes out to 16.4% of the total cases of all Arizonans, and 7,867 pediatric cases per 100,000 pediatric population. So there are the numbers. Certainly, as I think we've all seen in the media, the numbers and the attack rate is slowing down. The questions for this week somewhat reflect that. Certainly the ongoing dialogue about vaccines and also what's happening in terms of the virus. Perhaps we'll start with the simple questions and get into some of the more difficult ones. First question, what is the status of the variants in Arizona? We continue to have the B1.1.7, otherwise known as the United Kingdom strain, as the most prominent variant. And in fact, that has become the most common cause of new cases. We also continue to see cases of the Cal.20.C, so one of the Southern California strains, which has mutations seen both in the B.1.1.7 and also in the Brazilian P.1 variant. So those two continue to be the two big ones. Importantly, although not asked, the next question, of course, is, do the current vaccines available in the states provide good coverage for those variants? And yes, they do. This actually is going to be important into another question about boosters, and that is, how good are the vaccines against the variants which we know about in the country and in the world? There's been data recently released through the United Kingdom, which really seems to be the hot spot of both variant identification as well as vaccine trials and cumulative data regarding the variants versus the vaccines and vice versa. And as we know, again, from the media, the India strain, the B.1.617 subset 2, is the most common variant now, and that actually has eclipsed the United Kingdom strain, the B.1.1.7. However, available data suggest that the Pfizer vaccine, by extension the Moderna vaccine, so both messenger RNA vaccines, retain adequate efficacy against all variants tested, including India, UK, Brazil, and South Africa. to the point we're vaccinating here in this country at a time when our numbers are low, thank heavens, and especially vaccinating the remaining at-risk patient population, i.e. pediatrics, has good outlook in terms of further reducing the caliber and the extent of the pandemic in the States, and hopefully that can be extended to the rest of the world. So far, the current vaccines retain efficacy. Fingers crossed it stays that way. Natural next question then provided is, I've heard conflicting reports about whether boosters will be needed. What's the latest on that? Well, I guess we have to talk a little bit about semantics, or what do we mean by the term booster? Now, there are and have been trials of the current vaccines giving a third dose in the case of both messenger RNA vaccines, and a second dose in the case of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is the single-shot adenovirus vectored vaccine. And in all cases, the booster, or additional vaccine dose, I should say, has added to the stated efficacy, but it's not clear at this point that in an otherwise healthy, immunocompetent person that it provides any significant additional benefit. Now, don't take that the wrong way. That doesn't mean the booster is worthless. It simply means that the first 2 doses of the messenger RNA vaccine, or the first dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, are quite efficacious all by themselves, and a booster is not needed. However, what I would interpret this question to also include is, what about the future? We know from studies in volunteers and also healthcare workers for the vaccine trials that immunity from vaccination is lasting upwards of 6 months. We also know that same immunity in terms of neutralizing antibodies and immortalization of the cellular immunity is lasting for nearly a year after wild-type infection. So vaccine and wild-type infection are providing good protection for up to a year and counting. It may well be that we will settle into an annual booster vaccination, as much as we see with the influenza vaccine, although that can potentially is a new vaccine every year. But a new COVID vaccine, perhaps, is the better way to put that, every year, just to keep the numbers up in terms of immune protection and the numbers down in terms of viral load. But I don't think anybody has any data yet, and certainly no predictive modeling today to suggest what the fate or the need might be for boosters. So yeah, you're right, conflicting reports indeed, and that simply means that we don't know what we don't know. We'll have to keep coming back to that question in future episodes and see if we find out any more. Next question. Florida is supposed to be ending its daily COVID reporting soon. Will Arizona follow suit? How long should we continue tracking the numbers? Boy, I'm unfortunately, I'm the wrong person to ask this question, since I'm not in any way related to the Arizona Department of Health Services and their decision making for tracking. However, I think if we continue to see lower numbers, that the benefit of tracking may start to wither away. However, I would also point out that we've just finished a school year, which has been quite exciting in terms of virtual learning, hybrid learning, etc. And we're anticipating the start of another school year in August for most of us, and also the uncertain impact of vaccinations. How early can we start vaccinating, and when? Yes, we thankfully have approval for the Pfizer vaccine for ages 12 and up, and I anticipate we'll have Moderna approved for age 12 and up in the very near future, perhaps even before the next podcast occurs, and followed by other vaccines as well. But what about kids less than age 12? So when can we get all school-age children, meaning basically 5 years of age and up and even younger? The anticipation of that is by July. Gosh, that's only like a month away, or certainly by September. So I have a sense that we'll continue in Arizona to continue the tracking numbers and the reporting of those numbers at least until the fall, just to help inform school districts in their decision making for what to do, basically. So I'm sorry, I do not have a specific answer to this excellent question. In terms of how long should we continue tracking the numbers, I would suggest we need to continue to tracking the numbers because we are still at risk for another surge, a mini surge, a big surge, who knows, if and or when a new variant might happen to emerge. So far, the variants have emerged elsewhere, with the exception perhaps of a combination event occurring in Southern California. But that only occurred because they had large viral numbers. If we don't know the numbers are there, if we don't know what the risk of the variant emergence is, then how are we going to capture a new variant which might emerge right here and we would be ground zero? We don't know. So balance that, which is the fear of the unknown, with the likelihood of a surge, and that likelihood is quite low. So I think it is, so far as we're able to continue to capture the data recorded and reported to the Arizona Department of Health Services, that's a good idea until we truly are at least a half year past the pandemic as it affects the whole global population. Okay, going on into some more difficult questions. The next one, CDC official was cited as stating the United States is not ready for another pandemic. What do I think might be the most important things we learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how can we best prepare for any future pandemics? Now, to be openly transparent, I have not seen the official quote of that CDC statement, but I certainly have heard anecdotal and media coverage of it. I think the reference was in more extent to the fact that we are pandemic weary, we are mask weary, social distancing weary, and were another pandemic of a different virus to come along, it would be a huge uphill struggle to get back to social distancing and mask wearing, et cetera, and so forth. Certainly as we continue to adopt the most recent CDC permissive recommendations to come out from behind the mask. So in that regard, I agree, we're not ready for another pandemic, nor shall we be for quite some time. We are absolutely recovering in every sense of the word, financially, emotionally, spiritually, healthcare-wise, you name it. We have a long recovery yet to go before we're anywhere ready with fresh energy and fresh resources to tackle a new pandemic. That said, now is absolutely the time to try and capture the lessons learned so that we don't or are not doomed to repeat the same history we just repeated. Pandemics are nothing new, and every 100 years or so, the historians say, we're at risk for a pandemic or worse. I would suggest that may be changing in the day and age of very rapid and easy international travel. So I would suggest that the next pandemic is not 100 years away, but it could be 1 year away. It could be 5, it could be 10, it could be 50 years away. Hopefully, the lessons that we learned from this pandemic are things which we can grasp, hold on to, and perhaps formalize into a much more ready response. For example, through the CDC, a disease screening committee which looks for, predicts, monitors, and very aggressively follows status of infectious diseases around the world in terms of risk to this country. We were caught by surprise by the Ebola outbreak in West Africa when Mr. Thomas Duncan from Liberia presented to Texas Health Presbyterian and unfortunately died while in the way infecting 2 of our U.S. nurses. That caught everyone by surprise, and our reaction to that was extreme, to say the least, in terms of finances, time spent, fear, loss of geography, the whole 9 yards. I would suggest that lessons learned from that unfortunately downplayed our response to the emerging outbreak starting in Wuhan province, China. And in fact, the first several months, if you all recall, historically, we were monitoring the so-called SARS outbreak or the COVID-19 outbreak, mostly because it affected, parts of Asia and then parts of Europe, without any real thoughts that it would significantly affect us here in the States. And we base that in part on our fatigue from the Ebola response and also on what had happened with the first SARS coronavirus, SARS-CoV-1, which occurred in 2003. So this pattern is not new, and in fact it has been recognized by medical historians and also by historic author Albert Camus in La Peste, talking about the Black Death, in which he describes the human response to pandemics in a 3-act play. Act 1 is ignorance, in which we may focus our interests elsewhere, protecting our own economics, our own finances. That won't happen here, we're immune, or we're too busy with our own self, guidance, etc., and so forth, to be bothered by or to prepare for the possibility that other country might send its infection our way. That's Act 1. Act 2, public awareness. Holy cow, it happened here. Oh my gosh, Mr. Duncan from Liberia came to Texas and died. That's terrible. And How could this happen? CDC, how could you not prevent that? And similarly, patients from China and just even international travelers end up on the west coast of this country in the early winter of 2020 with SARS coronavirus 2 infection, and after that, the gloves come off. How could this happen? I demand accountability. And unfortunately, the human demand for accountability gets in the way of a reasoned and reasonable approach to pandemic control. Act 3 then is either sink or swim. It's the response. Is the response supportive, effective? Does it do its job? Or is it dramatic and disruptive? And I would suggest, and you're certainly welcome to form your own opinions on this, that our response in the United States has been both. And we're not quite done with that yet. So if we could learn our lessons from this 3-act play, and instead of spending so much time and energy ignoring the possibility that an infection is going to start here or come here, and stop spending so much time on finger pointing and the blame game, even including the current concerns about the origins of SARS coronavirus 2 in China, which does nothing rather than fuel continued speculation. We waste our time and our money and our resources on that, rather than spending those time, money, and resources on helping those who remain vaccine hesitant, or those who should be wearing masks for their own protection or for the protection of others and refuse to do so. So many different locations and directions to send those resources, and only by learning those lessons, by formalizing them into a response plan, and by remaining and funding the ability to remain wide-eyed, open-minded, and educated about threats around the world, only in that way can we be prepared for the next pandemic. There, getting off my soapbox. I hope that that is what the questioner was asking about. But we got a long ways to go before we can actually embrace the lessons learned from this most recent and still ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Last question. With ongoing discussion on coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, being manipulated in the lab to have stronger genes than what we have seen in naturally occurring viruses, how can I best have conversations with my patients' families about what this means, about this risk? So I guess, once again, to be transparent, we need to be very clear about what exactly we think might be happening in laboratories. First, I guess we need to recognize the fact that the federal government in the United States has added some fuel to the fire about the potential laboratory origins of SARS coronavirus 2, noting that it seems to have most strong similarities to a bat strain of virus, and that the bats known to carry that strain of virus did not occur anywhere near Wuhan, China. Meaning that there is a virus study, a research lab in the region that may have been experimenting, theoretically, on that bat SARS coronavirus. So I suppose that's possible. It certainly is. As I just finished saying, I don't honestly think that makes a big difference in terms of our response to the pandemic, other than the scientific and teleological explanations of where this virus comes from. That is a far cry from current attempts to, I guess, manipulate the virus, and I'm not aware that is occurring. Of course, I suppose it's a possibility. Certainly the virus is being worked on, manipulated in terms of driving a strong immune protection, both for vaccines as well as immunomodulatory agents and other therapeutic drugs to try and help us treat patients with active COVID-19. So if we are to take one thing, I think, out of this current conversation and dialogue, it would be that in the United States, at least, there are very, very strict protocols and significant oversight for any laboratory functioning with a potentially bioactive infectious pathogen. Bioactive meaning could be weaponized, could be the source of a pandemic, could be something which could transmit or be contagious easily from human to human or animal subject to human. I personally in fellowship worked with a very toxin virulent strain of E. coli, studying enterohemorrhagic E. coli, and there were rules and regs that I followed in my laboratory, and this has been some time ago. So in the States, at least, we follow those very closely. What about other parts of the world? Well, don't know, is the big question. How do we then consolidate this conversation into something which will be educational and transparent to our patients and their families, and not further drive a source of fear or concern or angst or anxiety, and then by extension extend the concern for vaccine hesitancy. And I think it can only be the transparent nod to, well, I understand that investigations are occurring. However, I'm aware that in this country, there are very strict protocols and regulations to control any vaccine modification or any virus modification that may be occurring. Boy, that's about as far as I can go. I do not have insider knowledge to any specific virus modifications that are occurring. The stronger genes that some people may be thinking of may be actually a mistaken understanding of how we're getting a better immune reaction to the genes for the spike protein, for example, for the virus, or for several antigenic structures on the virus. And so perhaps couching that in a positive. These are attempts to make better our current immunomodulatory medications like the gamma globulins, our vaccines, our antiviral medications, all of which are being done for the benefit of human beings, and all of which are being done under very strict or very close observation. So that's what I've got for you all. Thank you again for excellent questions. Please do keep them coming. Thank you as always for listening to ID Talk. Arizona AAP members can submit questions for future episodes to covid@azaap.org. For more information and resources related to COVID-19 in Arizona, or to learn how to become a member, please visit us at azaap.org. Meanwhile, keep asking the questions. Thank you all again for your service and support of pediatric health. And hang in there, folks. It's another week, and here we go again. Thanks.